Lothos is just asking me if somebody's gonna snipe him if he enables.
Good morning, and welcome to the pre-show for day one of the ETS World Championships. This is rekenner, your tournament organizer and pre-show host. So, this tournament doesn't quite run like the previous invitationals in the mid-season major we have run. We're trying out some new ideas for the format. And so this will be a 4-day event run over this weekend and next weekend. And the first weekend will basically just be a full round robin between all 16 players. We are running the first 9 rounds of the round robin today, and then running the last 6 rounds of the round robin tomorrow, where the top 4 players of the round robin advance directly to the double elimination portion in day 4, so they make top 8. And the bottom 4 players play a 4-player single elimination to make it into a second round robin. So the second round robin will be played out on day 3, and that will determine our final 4 players to make it into the top 8. It's a long tournament, maybe a bit ambitious in terms of the number of rounds being played by the players, but we really want to determine who has brought the best deck, who is playing the best, and who has the stamina to make it through a long tournament. All of these are important aspects of being the best at card games in general and, Eternal. So we have a $3,000 prize pool for this event. So these players aren't playing for peanuts. The winner takes home $1,000. Second place takes $750. Third takes $500. Fourth takes $250. Fifth and sixth take $150. And just making it to the top 8 guarantees you at least $100 in prize money. And so as you can see, the full details for the event can be found on the aReNGee Eternal website, and the bracket can be found on Challenge. We have linked to that in the Eternal Discord. And so, joining me for this pre-show this morning are Neon, the aReNGee Eternal writer extraordinaire himself, and Paradox, the player from Seek Power Gaming, who unfortunately did not quite make it through the World wildcard to make it into World itself. Good morning, gentlemen. How are you doing?
Doing great, buddy. How are you?
Good morning, rekenner. Glad to be here.
So, Neon, real quick, do you remember how tournaments work? Should I give you a breakdown, how sideboarding, best of threes, and all that work?
I've been in the booth for any sort of tournament and stuff, but I think I remember the basics, so don't worry about that. Good. I am super pumped to be here for this one. I think that this is a really interesting metagame. A lot of the times people associate some of the ETS events of being just mid-range soup. But this one, I think there are a lot of people who took some really bold takes on these decks, a lot of cool stuff going on there, and I'm sure that we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about that. But I think I remember more or less what was going on here, so don't worry about that.
Yeah. Usually the meta for tournaments seems to be to go big and over everyone and kind of ignore that aggro exists. Where people didn't do that as much this time, but then the aggro kind of did come out in force as well. But they are very interesting aggro lists. One of the lists I've called out is Huru Flyers. Loco Pojo brought a deck that has actually 0 ground units against a field with 9 decks with 4 main decks and Storm Titans. But to kind of quote Sir Rhino from the other day on his stream, even though everyone was running for Sandstorm Titans, the field that he was expecting seemed to be soft to Flyers.
Yeah, that's something that a lot of people think, you play for Sandstorm Titan, and obviously it's an anti-flying card, which is a useful tool to have, but, that's not really it that you can have for a plan. And you'll see that, in some of these decks that they might be a little bit soft to that sort of thing. Generally the field, I think, is the what will stand out to people the most through looking at these deck lists is how aggressive it is, especially for a tournament event. There is this sort of stereotype that are too easily hated out, and that they're not really viable in the sideboarded formats for Eternal, but we really have here a pretty of fire aggro decks.
Yeah, it is a pretty good array. I certainly have to disagree about fire being a viable tournament choice or aggro decks being a viable tournament choice, and hopefully we'll get to see a little bit of that here today. One interesting thing of note is that of the control decks, I don't think we actually have any primal-based control decks like Feln or sort of or Chalice or anything like that. And actually, our only sort of real control decks is going to be the Xenon control list, as well as a big Combre, if you're willing to call it a control deck. That's sort of an up in the air question.
I mean, I think it's pretty fair to say specifically, like if you're talking about Angry Chicken's deck, which is of course the Evoda combo deck, and that's pretty clearly like I would think a combo control style of build. Not the traditional control deck though you're talking about. There's no Wisdom of the Elders, here. There's no Lightning Storm here. Certainly no Black Sky Harbinger in the metagame, which is really unusual for what you would expect. There's usually at least some amount of that in any tournament of the ETS that you see.
Yeah. No Black Sky Harbingers and all Mystic Ascendant control, I suppose you might call it. Though we do have sort of some mid-range control lists as well from Kamado. But yeah, otherwise no Black Sky Harbingers, which is actually might have been a pretty well positioned card for this weekend. So it'll be really interesting to see how the Mystic Ascendant control decks can take on the field.
Yeah, one of the things people have been saying is kind of Feln may not be so much of a meta call deck as a player comfort deck. And unfortunately, Alunex didn't manage to make it through the World's Wildcard. And Rhino, historically, has been a very big player for Feln Control, has been very much on a Xenon kick. If you've watched his stream anytime in the last 2 months, basically since Horus Traver came out, he's been the biggest proponent for Life Force, for Xenon midrange, for Xenon control / big mid-range out there. And so I don't think it was too far out there to expect a list like this from him.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
Yeah. No, I think that there are a lot of people who are pegging Rhino at the very least of some variant of Xenon. The fact that one of the things I think some other people noted, even in the Discord, a lot of people were probably expecting some amount of Xenon killers. This has been a well-performing deck in the Invitational. We had, of course, it was won by Lights Out Ace. Somebody top 8 with it last weekend. So it's a pretty popular deck, both on ladder and in the ETS events, but nobody brought it here. The only Xenon decks that we're seeing here are the big Xenon variant, which I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about a little bit later. But I think that's a pretty notable, omission here. There's vacancy, along with this lack of primal-based control decks.
Yeah, I think it was a little. Oh, go ahead, Rick.
I just wanted to add to Neon's comment real quick. I think Xenon midrange actually would have been fairly good for this event, at the very least against the TJP decks and the aggro decks. Ion is a house on its own against aggro. Vara's Favor, picking off Grenadin Drones or Oni Ronins or Pyro Knights. I think a large portion of the field actually would have been fairly soft to Xenon midrange, but maybe the players next level themselves a little bit, expecting Xenon midrange to be what people were aiming at.
Yeah, I think so. Eternal players are pretty good at next leveling themselves. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. I believe we actually have only 3 Xenon initiations in the entire tournament, and those are
correct.
In Toth's list. Yes. Definitely a little bit of a surprise, even if we're not playing killers, it's a surprise to see a lack of Xenon initiations. It's such a strong card, and it's actually in the Praxis list by Toth.
I'm a little surprised it isn't in either of the big Xenon lists, if not only as maybe a 1 or 2 of in the sideboard. But they are playing Stray into Shadow, so I think maybe that is taking a similar-ish role in terms of what they want, how they want to answer their opponent's threats.
So maybe it'd be good to then just like jump right into talking about these Xenon decks that we did, that we do see. So Lights Out Ace and Serino, were working with each other before the tournament to come up with some decks. They both like this style of deck a good deal. So I think that's sort of how they arrived on the list. For people who haven't had a chance to look at what this generally looks like, there's one thing, there's no power stones in the deck, which is a bit of an unusual thing for the Xenon control lists. Instead, it just has a lot of removal. It's playing 4 Annihilates in the main deck. That's a lot. 2 Strange Shadows, not a card that is sees a ton of play. And the top end threats are 4 Waystone Infuser. Champion of Mystery and Mystic Ascendant. So not quite as much of the top end beef that you see in some other lists. There's a lot of them who are also playing 4 Carnosaur, Predatory Carnosaur. I like this current mix of these top end threats. I'm not crazy about Champion of Mystery decks. There are other people who are bigger believers of it than I am. But I think that in this field, they're not going to get too punished for it because it's the sort of card that really hates harsh rule style control decks, and it's just not something that's particularly popular here.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a really cool list, and I really like a lot of what's going on. It's a little bit similar to sort of the Xenon ramp list that I think Bruised by God was the original creator or sort of at least player of this deck. But yeah, he omits a lot of the ramp choices. There's no really ramp involved at all. Often to take a more slow rolling route. I do actually think the Stray into Shadow is pretty well situated in a deck like this. Even if it does struggle against, or at least traditionally would have struggled against some of the mid-range options. I think that right now, actually, against the mid-range that not only we will see today, but that we could have seen, Stray actually hits a kind of a lot of cards in this metagame. Obviously, it's going to hit everything in the aggro decks, and in other mid-range decks like Praxis, it's going to be able to hit Crimson Firemaw. It's going to hit Dawnwalkers and permanently knock them out of the game, which is a pretty big deal. And then against Xena mid-range, which we will not be seeing today, but if we had, it would be able to take out, again, the Dawnwalkers, the Aeons, and Auric Interrogators. So I think Stray is actually a really good meta call right now. Normally it would be really soft to Elysian and Combray, since those units typically are a whole lot bigger, but those are not really present this time around. One interesting thing, sort of a variation in this deck that, or the deviation that this deck takes, is that it omits on Predatory Carnosaurs and only puts them in the sideboard, opting only for the Champion of Mysteries and the Mystic Ascendants. So it's not as much of a sort of a cut them down with the 6 drops, but rather start the real slow rolling train to victory with the Champion of Mysteries and the Mystic Ascendants.
And I think that a couple of those choices are really smart right now. So, for instance, the Strain to Shadows are going to be totally clutch against the Combray party list that we're going to see, which ended up being the most popular archetype. Like that is like really important attack card there. I don't know how that matchup's going to generally go, but if Xenon draws that card, they're probably going to win. Like the Predatory Carnosaur, I think is a really good choice for a metagame where you're expecting Bart, you're expecting Silverwing Familiar, build a beast type of threats, and there isn't that sort of thing very present. I mean, Unearthly's kind of playing a deck that has a little bit of that flavor, but nothing compared to what we've seen before the Bart nerf, for instance. So it's just not the kind of card that you need in large quantities right now. And if you like, the Xenon is just going to say like, yeah, I'm just going to make this board stall with my 7/7s and 6/6s, and then eventually beat you down with these Champions of Mystery. That way, that just seems like a pretty good plan in this field because there's not a lot of decks that can punish you for it.
Yeah, I would completely agree. The one thing I am worried about with the deck list, the only real thing, is the 4 main board Annihilates. I think in a lot of matchups, it's going to serve them really well. But in other matchups, it might be a little bit of a dead card. So hopefully they can navigate that situation really well.
Yeah, I think that's a good one to point out, that it definitely has some weak spots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Annihilate is certainly the strongest removal spell in the game when it's relevant, but it can feel very dead when you're staring down, Awakened Student into Seraph curve outs, or if you're playing against Bart into Tavrod curve outs. But it, when it hits very well.
Absolutely. Did we want to move on to our trio of Stone Scar decks that we have here today? I believe the second most popular deck list today.
It is. Although it's kind of a spectrum of lists. It's not three people running a similar list. We have Kampf Kroat kind of on one end of the spectrum. He's running the kind of go big burn queen that's running a lot of high end, less in the way of one drops, but he has Soulfire Drake Obliterate style. Then we have Sunnyvale running a deck reminiscent of Manu S's Stone Scar deck wins. It's not running Rally in the main. However, he is running 4 Grenadin Drone, 4 Oni Ronin, 4 Pyro Knight, 2 Knife Jack, 14 1-drops. He really has to hit a 1-drop for his deck to go off, but he's got 14 of them, so he's all but guaranteed to be able to play something on turn 1. And then finally, we have Ilya K bringing Rally itself. He does not have Jito in the list, but he is, full on go wide, kill your opponent by turn 4 style deck. Paradox, you are one of the most well-known aggro players in the tournament field. What are your takes on which of these 3 decks is the best against the field?
Ooh, that's a really tough call. I haven't really gotten a chance to, I guess, really think about each one and its finer workings against everything. But just sort of taking a look at it, I'm always a pretty big fan of sort of the traditional bird queen, which or the big queen as some people call it, the one that offers the 4 obliterates and 3 soulfire drakes as well as mainboard impending dooms against the metagame. But it's hard to say because impending doom might actually be a little bit improperly placed right now. With it seems like there's a whole lot more annihilates, vanquishes, and even a couple polymorphs flying around. And so it might actually be that Sunnyvale or potentially even Ilya's lower to the ground queens lists are a little bit more well positioned for today, being able to get really under a lot of these decks that are not planning for much aggro or don't have enough aggro hate. I believe there's only 3 Combray healers in the entire tournament this week, and that's on Hylar's sideboard. So that's kind of a little bit of a playground for any sort of low to the ground queen list. Between Ilya's and Sunnyvale's, it's really hard to say because Sunnyvale's I think is a little bit more sort of robust, and it stays low without trying to go completely all out. It still stays with obliterates. But Ilya, obviously, with Rally, you can always just roll really high, and I think he's about ready to roll the bones because he is playing, I believe, 22 1-drops or at least 20. Yeah, it looks like
I believe 20. It is just 20.
Yeah, 20 1-drops, 20 1-cost units, and he even goes and omits the 2-drop Rakano Outlaw in favor for just having 4 Assembly Line and 3 Cinder Yetis. And then just tops out with Rally, Bandit Queen, and 1 Shadowlands Guide. Even going to omit not only Jito, but also Lurking Sanguar, which is a really common card that you would see in lists like this. He's really prepared to just nail down all the 1-drops and swing in. So if I had to say just one, I still would probably give it to Comp just because I like the well-rounded list, but I don't think you could go wrong at all with Sunnyvale or Ilya's list today. Neon, what do you think?
I'm gonna come blazing hot in here with the hot takes. I am all about Ilyak's list, man. I literally think that if I had to take any deck in the tournament right now and play it in the tournament, no question, this would be it. This field is like very underprepared for go wide aggro. That's just like come here to kill people, in my opinion. Lightning Storm, main or sideboard in this entire thing. Now, you're almost right with the there's a total of 6 in the sideboards and 1 main deck in all of the decks. That's nothing. Of lifesteal units in the entire field, we have 8 Ion, like full stop. that card is totally beatable with this kind of a deck, especially with against a deck that doesn't have any pump effects for him to get bigger. I really think that in my opinion, if he draws consistently, like, I mean, obviously this is a deck that can flood out, it can run bad, but if it does what it came here to do, I think that it has a pretty good matchup against basically everything. And the one deck that I would be the most concerned about, I think, is if I were playing the rally deck, is party lists, but those seriously struggle from some consistency issues, and it's really easy to imagine that they play one thing in the first 3 turns of the game, and you play like 7, like you win those games easy. So I really like that. The other 2 decks, I like them kind of in order of how aggressive they are. So Ilya's being the best, followed by Sunnyvale, followed by comps. I'm a little bit curious as to some of the numbers in comps list. Just going to go to it quickly, and some of the interesting choices here. So there's like 1 quarry, 2 ornate katana, 3 Varus favor, and 2 and there's some weird numbers here which I find a little bit curious, but I'm sure this ends up being a deck that works well for him and that he understands how it functions. But as you're mentioning, the impending doom, I don't think it's at its best weekend right now. There's just a lot of like the banishes, the annihilates, the vanquishes, and I would rather be playing a deck that kind of avoids a lot of that, which is really what something like the Rally Queen does. So that's why my pick, honestly, for my favorite deck in the tournament right now, given how the metagame shook out.
That's fair. I do think that at the very least, as far as impending doom goes, even if it is a little bit soft to removal this weekend, I do think the thing that that keeps it around and sort of the reason why it's so good is that it does typically end up being the card that if it goes unanswered, it does just win the game, and often it's still worth playing in the metagames where it's a little bit soft. But yeah, I'm really excited to see sort of how each of the decks does, and it's interesting because normally you wouldn't get to see just how you'd have to say in theory which deck was going to be good, but in a round robin we'll actually get to see, just assuming players are keeping some same mental stamina and technical play, we'll actually get to see which deck statistically was the best for the weekend. So that'll be very exciting.
Yeah, and even like the first round one is one that I'm really curious to see how it works out. That was one of the matchups that I was most looking forward to seeing, which I think we're going to be watching Ilya K versus Loco Pojo. We can talk about that. We'll be talking about that deck shortly from now, but really cool deck that he brought up, the Huru Flyers, and I have no idea how it's going to match up against the Rally deck. So that'll be one that is to watch, in my opinion. That'll be really cool.
Yeah, completely agree.
So let's take a quick look at some of the other Fire aggro deck, which is to say, Child Roland brought a deck that I think you're very familiar with, Paradox. It is a Skycrag aggro deck with Steelfang Chakram.
Yes, he did. This is basically the exact same deck that I played this last weekend at the World's Wildcard Tournament, and I did help him with testing pretty extensively, if I'm being honest, for this tournament. And he opted only to make one mainboard change, which was, I believe he cut 1 Chakram for, I want to say, like a Rakano Outlaw or something, which I can totally understand. Even when I was making the deck, there was just a few single card choices that I was wavering on about where they should go. But yeah, he is playing Chakram Skycrag, and honestly, I think the deck is personally the best Fire aggro deck right now. That's just a personal opinion, but I think it's really well positioned, and the addition of Chakram really did a lot to clear up a lot of Skycrag's previous weaknesses, as well as the introduction of Crimson Firemaw. It's sort of giving it what I would call the red, just impending doom, acting sort of as the traditional Burn Queen lists did or do, and it has a couple of advantages over normal Fire decks that I think go a little bit unseen here. The first thing is that the deck actually has access to a lot of flyers with Cloud Snake Harrier, Amber or Cobalt Monument. Sorry, Cobalt Monument, And then of course the Crimson Fire Maws and the Soulfire Drakes, which I believe gives it's 12 or 14 flyers in the main board, and that ends up being really really relevant in a burn deck. I don't think people get to appreciate how nice it is to have what often are just unblockable units in a burn deck and have almost half the units be essentially unblockable. Um, Coupled with Chakram, it sort of makes most units, but especially all flying units, must kill units immediately, or else they're going to be taking 7, 8, 9 damage in the air, and sort of really just take usually all it takes is one swing like that to sort of put them under the gun and put them within burn range, assuming that you've any reasonable start. Then it couples with Champion of Fury, of which, of course, I think every Eternal player at this point is pretty familiar with how disgusting Champion of Fury can be in terms of putting early game damage in, often getting 7 or 8 damage in by turn 2 or 3, coupled with like a Permafrost or something like that. Then with Vadius, of course, the Vadius, alongside Snowcrest Yeti, offers a lot of Aegis units for the deck, and I believe I have 7 in the main board, which makes for it works out a lot better against early game removal and just decks that rely on non-killer, non-weapon removal to get through. And in my opinion, it makes just the deck compared to Stone Scar a little bit more consistent in getting its early game damage in and less vulnerable to opponents' good starts, like with high removal hands and whatnot, which is especially relevant against a lot of the Praxis decks right now that now are playing like 4 Purify and 4 Torch in the main board, for example. So I think it gets to play a little bit more of a consistent burn game. It's a lot less about going all out and sort of getting under like Skycrag decks of the past that focused on like 12 1-drops. Though it still gets to do that because sometimes you just have turn 1 Oni Ronin, turn 2 Champion of Fury, turn 3 another Champion of Fury, and it can still sort of play the the Zergy Swarm, kill them very quickly game. So I'm very excited to see how it plays out. It served me really well getting up to here. And hopefully it can do the same for Child Roland.
I do want to make a. Sorry, go ahead, Neon.
I was just going to say, I'm a little bit more skeptical of this deck. I mean, I know that it's Paradox is baby in some respects. I'm always worried about the multiple Chakram draws. There's a good deal of these Annihilates and Vanquishes in the field that can punish something like this. And especially I'm worried I would have to play it more to get a really good sense of it. I'm worried about the Cambrai party matchups. I definitely would be. If I was told that I had to play this deck in the tournament, I would feel pretty okay though. Like it's definitely something that I think that it's decently well positioned. Things I was saying about the rally deck, apply here in that people are skimping on removal, they're skipping on their defensive plays. So it's definitely got something going for it. To me, it's not quite the deck that I would be, because I would rather just be like, I'm just here to kill people, here to rally them out. And that's kind of how I would want to be doing it if I had the chance.
Fair enough. I will say that I had a lot of the same sort of concerns when I was first putting this deck together. It was not really something I set out to do. I didn't seek out like I'm going to take Steelfang Chakram and find the best deck for it. I was just trying to tune Skycrag, and it ended up being that the Chakram was a really just awesome choice. And I was worried about getting sort of losing a little bit too much tempo on getting vanquished or annihilated or whatnot. And certainly and during my turn, annihilate was really difficult. But what I found often was that if they were spending removal to get rid of the Chakram units, not only would I not lose any card advantage and get to keep using the Chakram over and over again, but usually they were having to spend so much time on their plays, just stopping them from killing me, and that often they would have to wear down on their offense and not be doing enough stuff themselves. And combined with just keeping units on the field, that usually was enough pressure to keep them down. But I can understand the concerns.
I do think this list is maybe a little bit reminiscent of Unearthly's Season 3 Invitational list, where he was kind of in a similar situation of, how do I build a fire deck that can punch through times big butt units? And his answer was Egen. So I think it's kind of a cool, interesting parallel to that. Decks taking cards that are maybe a little bit out of the beaten path to aim at the meta they expect.
Yeah, it definitely was a response to the vast amount of time decks, and I think some people might want to say that maybe you just shouldn't be playing Skycrag, but I actually would like to. I would say that I think the Eternal designers that they actually do a really good job of trying to put as many sort of options into every faction as they possibly can, and allowing for a lot more of a creative metagame instead of just saying like, if you're playing this deck, you just have no options to this. I think they do a very good job of allowing every faction to get through things, and I think Chakram is probably sort of Skycrag's best way of getting through heavy time things, whereas maybe Stone Scar, for example, would just have more obvious options with things like Annihilate.
Yeah. So we've brushed on a little bit earlier, but let's talk about Kamato's deck list. This is a very similar list to the list he ran last weekend. He's made some small changes here and there. He's brought in Valkyrie Enforcer. He's reduced the number of Icaria. A couple of other small changes here and there. But it's a very interesting deck list because it's not really armory. It's not really mid range. It's maybe not quite really control either. But I've been kind of jokingly calling it FJS removal pile, and I don't mean that in the usual sense of piles in a pile of bad cards. I mean that in the sense that it is running, I believe the count is 18 removal spells if you don't include Auric Runehammer as a removal spell. So Neon, I think one of the flaws with a list like this can be it one-for-ones itself to death. Do you think this list is going to have that problem?
Yeah, I am going to start off by saying I haven't played the deck. I don't know it well enough to kind of really say for sure, like, okay, this is what its matchups are, its worst matchups are, and this is the issues with it. To me though, I am concerned that a deck like this, it can be overpowered by things like the Xenon deck. You can go under it with something like Rally, and that you really just the only thing that you kind of excel at is the fair games that are in between that. Like, sure, the card quality in this deck is really high. I mean, nobody can dispute that. Maidens, Harsh Rules, Tavrods, Icarias, like these cards are all stars at the things that they do. But this is we're still seeing the impact of that smuggler stash change where these sorts of decks just don't have refill, they don't have card draw, and as a result, like if you trade resources back and forth with your opponent in a way that that they're able to handle what you're doing, I think that you're going to run out of steam a lot of the time. Force Sabotage main also is really quite aggressive in my opinion of a metagame choice. Like that's like I really feel like this is something that maybe you're trying to hit specifically Chalice as a matchup. Like what matchups that we're seeing here does that really excel against? I guess it's not bad against the Cambrai party lists, but it's certainly not, I think, exceptional against anything else. And like definitely if you're drawing those off the top in a top deck war against something like the Xenon deck that you're trying to go along with, like that's just a whiff. So this is definitely not one of the top lists for me of the ones I'd be the most interested in, because I feel like it has some problems. But I will admit, I haven't played it myself. I don't know well enough, and it just does have a lot of good cards. So maybe it's better than I'm giving it credit for.
One thing I do think is very interesting about this list is, in a weird way, it might be one of the better lists at dealing with the go wide aggro lists, because it actually is running 4 Copper Hall Bailiff, which is maybe an undersung hero in those matchups. Of course, it's only in the sideboard.
Yeah, it makes a pretty big difference here. So, because like the thing is that also with we're doing best of 3s for all the round robin, correct?
Correct.
Just wanted to verify that, and also for our audience to know we're doing best of threes, not best of fives. But okay, so game one, for instance, against somebody like Ilya, the first game, like it's just not close. I think for the most part, and if both players have functional draws, he's a wild favorite. All that he needs then is for his opponents to miss the power drops on time, miss some influence requirements, in one of the next two games, and he's golden. Like obviously the multiple bailiff draw is going to be hard to beat, but can you really consistently get multiple of those in the following two games to turn the matchup into something that's actually acceptable? I'm really skeptical of that.
If I may jump in, I'm actually a little bit higher on the deck than I think you two are. Not only in against these matchups, but in the field. I mean, it certainly might have a tough game one, but I think there's this pretense of the fire deck is always going to have the nuts hand every time, and it is. I think we're all like it doesn't always happen as often as I would like it to happen. Usually when I'm the one playing. But I do think the bailiffs are going to really help him out here because even if it is in the sideboard, that is still going to end up being at least half the games, potentially 2/3 of the games if he does end up taking it. And he still has a lot of other cards that do typically serve really well against these matchups, like mainboard Arc Runehammers do a lot of work, and he does have Torch as opposed to sort of the Argenport decks, which if he was on straight Argenport, I could see how he could be stuck, but without having a multitude of one drops, which doesn't always happen. Torch can really do a lot of work in handling it, and then he does have Harsh Rule and to really level the field. And Ilya, I don't believe is carrying any obliterates to help push that through. So all Kamado needs to do is sort of get a decent control and then stick a Tavrod, and from there on he sort of has the game under himself. So yeah, I mean it'll be a toss up to see if he can get there. I completely agree with that, but I do like I like a lot of the things that Kamado's deck has going on.
I will say I don't think I'm terribly I don't think I'm down on the list per se. I just have played lists like this in the past, and I've felt that the deck is maybe a little bit prone to, as I said before, one for winning itself to death. It can sometimes have the nut draw, as it were, of you play a Quarry on turn 2, you discard a Privilege of Rank, your hand is suddenly 5 gas cards, you just drew 2 power, removal, you stick a Runehammer and a Tavrod or a Karia, and then you beat your opponent down. But I just I've also had a lot of hands where it's just like, well, I've played 4 removal spells and my opponent has drawn 4 less power than me. But again, I think that's maybe more of a problem against the aggro list. I think this deck is very well suited against a lot of the time mid-range decks because we're only seeing one deck with Dawnwalker, which is again a card that's very good against removal in general.
Yeah, but I don't think that you need to go with Dawnwalker. In fact, I actually think this deck might be fine against Dawnwalker. You're playing the 4 Statuary Maidens. You have just a ton of removal, and so you can probably overpower it with those respects. I think that the things that I would be concerned about are other decks like the Scouting Party decks. That's not going to be a trivial matchup with 4 Obelisk for Scouting Parties. Which might be the next deck that we talk about. But that's one that we are not be happy to play about, and that's against with this deck. And there's a lot of that there. So, I guess I'm the one who's in the last here in terms of the least excited about this deck. But we'll have to see. Maybe I'll be proven wrong, and it's a lot better than I think it is.
But yeah, as you said, let's talk about the TJP mid-range decks real quick. We have kind of the old and the new here. We have the modern style Cambrai party list, as Team ET likes to call it, which is being piloted by Sarius, Moosh, and Tobo. They're all on very similar lists. I think there's like an 85 card-ish pool between the 3 of them with some tech choices here and there as the players kind of season the deck to their liking. 4 Scouting Party in the main, 4 Xin and Obelisk, 2 Stand Together. kind of the commonality in terms of going wide. And then we see Love Up's list, which is kind of it's very similar to the list that he took to very, very good success in Season 3 Invitational and the mid-season Major. He's actually still running Cerso. He's running Reality Warden in the main. He is still running 3 scouting parties, but he has 2 Predatory Carnosaurs. He's not running quite as many of the dorks, and maybe he's a bit of the greedier list.
In some respects, he is greedier. You could say that, but one of the things that I would actually point to, this is one of the less sexy parts about decks, but makes a really big difference, is the power bases. The power bases between these 2 different styles is wildly different, and the one card that I would point to that makes that difference is Initiative Sands. So Initiative Sands and a deck like this, in any sort of obelisk deck, if you're able to stick it on turn 1 and you're able to keep it in play for multiple turns, can really supercharge your deck. You can really just kind of go off, and just be ahead, especially if you're on the play. You are wildly ahead in tempo all game long, but you really have to contort your power base in a 3-faction deck in order to get away with that. You'll notice in Love Up's deck, there are 3 time sigils. And then if you look at Moosh's deck, which is the same power base between the other Comrade Party decks as well, you have 7 time sigils. That's a pretty important difference to note. So that in order to get the Initiative Sands consistently on turn 1, you have to play that level of time sources, which then makes the rest of your power base a little bit less resilient. So the number one thing that I'm going to be keeping my eye on when watching this Cambrai party list, especially the version that's with the Initiative Sands, is is it worth the contortion of your power base? Is it worth the bit of the hit of the consistency in order to play a card like Initiative Sands, or is this deck just losing to its influence requirements too often? And I think that we're going to see some amount of that over the day. The deck is really powerful. Both of them are. I mean, let's be real. Both of these decks have a lot of really good cards in them. The ballot, but if you can't cast them on time, then you're in trouble.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say a lot of the same things. I think that even though it might seem like Love Up's list is greedier, at least in terms of the sort of the not only the cards, the more expensive cards, but also in its influence base. I do think that he plays a lot safer of a power base, like Neon said, and does not it doesn't crutch or sort of hinge itself so much on Initiative the Sands and hitting that on turn 1 as much as possible, and allows itself to play a little bit of a slower game, and is playing way more seats and banners, which I think is really going to come help it out. It's really interesting to see how Love Up, who hasn't been around for a while, how his deck, that it's still popular, and it's kind of cool to see that, but also how it's sort of diverged a little bit differently from the Cambrai party lists, and is opting to play cards like Cerso in the main board, whereas the Cambrai party lists have sort of given up on that. But I think it's I think it'll be interesting to see how it goes. I know there's a lot of people are really what would you say? They're very excited about the deck one way or the other. But clearly, it's proven itself to be pretty strong up to this point in terms of its success. So it'll be interesting to see if it can keep that up this weekend, especially because traditionally the deck is considered weak to aggro, and we have a little bit of a higher showing of that this weekend. So you'll have to see which one can handle the Burn Queens and the Sky Crags better than the others.
Yeah, I think that it's people tend to think of Rally as being this high roll deck that if you curve out properly and you get your Rally on time, that it's this like busted thing, but you have this tendency of flooding out. In some respects, I think that these mid-range deck is actually sort of more high variance of the deck in a very different sort of way. That is a little bit harder to see because it is playing so greedy with its power base, and specifically the Cambrai party list of the ET guys is playing very little removal. You have the 1 Island's Choice and 3 Vanquish, no permafrosts in the main deck. That's really saying something. And an opponent who's able to land a threat that like for instance, they have no way to remove a of the past, which is a card that is being there's 8 of those in the tournament. And you might really notice that. We'll have to see how it shakes out, and if the deck is consistent enough to put up the numbers that they're going to want. But it's definitely I think that it's a riskier choice than what some people might appreciate.
All right, so I did want to say that we will be wrapping this up fairly shortly to get into the actual event very soon, but I wanted to talk real quick about Angry Chicken's list, or at the very least, the meta call he made to bring his list. So when we look at his deck, he actually submitted the deck twice. The very first time he submitted with Aggro is Dead as his for fun name, and the second with Aggro Doesn't Exist as his for fun name. And I think he was probably a little sad when the deck lists were released this morning. Vote Combo is incredible at going over the top of like 3-faction greed pile that can often outvalue mid-range and even control decks. Like Feln, if you resolve a couple of Heart of the Vaults, can really just be like, oh, what do I do now? Same for Armory, same for any deck that likes spot removal. But Voto Combo is just like, no, I'm going to draw my entire deck, Alt Martial Ironthorn, and slam for like 300 damage. Good luck with, your Heart of the Vaults. That's cute. They're a 6/6. So do you think, is this a case of maybe the player who next leveled themselves the most? Do you think he still has a chance in this field?
He's got a really rough time ahead of him. Like a couple of like minor things, like clearly the Stone Scar deck's not a great matchup. The Skycrag deck also not a great matchup. But even something like the Xenon deck, which should be one of your best matchups, the fact that they're playing some Varro's Choice in the main deck as well is going to be fairly punishing. There's only 2 of them, but it means that they can hit that Vodacon out of your hand and really punish you in that way. So definitely you're worried for them. He's got a shot. It's a powerful deck still, and he's a really talented player. You can't take that away from him. Very talented. But there's definitely no question that he when he said that aggro doesn't exist, he fully bought into that way of thinking.
I almost wonder if he was saying that as a joke. I don't know if he truly believes that or not, or at least wants to believe it. One thing I do think that is at least a little bit interesting about the deck, though, even if it is certainly going to be a little bit soft to aggro game 1 under most circumstances, he does have not only 4 Power Stone, but even in being a Voto Combo list, he's playing 4 Harsh Rule main board, which is not typically as common in Voto Combo lists. So he will actually have access to turn 4 Harsh Rules, which is certainly really powerful and has not really been utilized, I think, too much yet since Horus Draver has come out. And again, if there's any player that can handle all the aggro, I'd have to say it's Angry Chicken and any sort of combination of Combrei cards.
If he was on one of the Harsh Rule list versions of Voto Combo, I would be straight up like counting him out. He just doesn't have a chance. That is definitely one of the most important cards in his deck in order to fight back from a lot of these other decks that we're seeing here. He's going to have to use them really well, get them on time a lot of the time, but definitely I'm at the very least I'm excited to see the deck here because it's clearly a sweet list that I'm a big fan of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I definitely agree with, I think if before deck lists were put out, if you were to ask, 100 people that have been, following the tournament series, you have to pick your player you think is most likely to win the event. Chicken may have been the favorite on that. I mean, he's definitely proven himself, which isn't, to slight the other players. This field is a Shark Tank. This really does appear to be fairly close to the best 16 players of this game over the last year. There have been a little bit of, I've heard people being like, wait, Pojo's in this, or is he washed up? And same for like Rhino a little bit. And I think it's really easy to ignore results early in a year and have a bit of a recency bias. But this is a very strong field. But I kind of agree that Chicken is maybe the odds-on favorite without knowing deck lists. So if anyone can pull this off, it's probably him.
So I'm just looking at the straw poll results for the fan vote. As of right now, the top two players actually in terms of the fan vote are Lights Out Ace and Earthly with 21 votes each, and then Angry Chicken is right below them. Now, I think that this was largely informed by people who didn't know what people were playing yet. So clearly that indicates that there's a lot of faith in Angry Chicken as just a player, which is rightly put there. And if there's anybody out there who hasn't watched him before, hopefully you'll be able to see him show off his skills in this tournament.
Indeed. And so I think that will wrap things up for our pre-show. Paradox, Neon, do you have any closing comments?
Do a last final shout out actually to Pojo's list. We didn't have very much of a chance to talk about it. There's so many other wonderful things to talk about, but I loved his take on Huru aggro, Huru Skies. Really bold choice, really cool deck list. We'll see if he's able to pull it off with that risky choice. Definitely one to watch.
Yeah, I too wanted to give a shout out to Pojo's list. I do think it's really great, and I did predict him in my top 4, and which was before seeing deck lists, and even still, I'm a big believer in Pojo. Though even that said, the top 4, at least for me, was really just sort of just random things, and for the most part, I just kind of put in friends and players and teammates that I've obviously worked with. I think everybody here is extremely good, and it's really hard to predict who actually will come on top of this thing. But yeah, other than that, no comments from me. Really glad I got to do this show this morning. So thank you for having me on, and I'm really excited for tournament today and for the next couple days.
Thanks for having me on too. It's been a blast talking about it, and I'm really looking forward to the games. It looks like a really sweet tournament.
Yeah, thank you both very much for coming on to the analyst desk. And with that, we will be heading to a short break. We'll be showing our sweet intro video again, as made by X Kirby. And we will be then joining our casters, Bradykin and aReNGee, for the first matchup, which is Ilya K versus Loco Pojo. Well, everyone, have a good morning, good afternoon, enjoy the rest of the tournament. It is going to be amazing.